Hey Grace! So I promised I would go over my bread making recipe with you and show you how to do it. Here's what we're going to do. You need the following ingredients. You need a traditional active dry yeast. I'm using Fleischmann's, which is easy to find in Canada. I don't know what you can find in Korea. If you can't find traditional dry yeast, please let me know and I'll get some in the mail too. You're also going to need white sugar, regular table salt, any kind of vegetable oil, and I'm going to use a blend of white flour and whole wheat flour. But if you want to use plain white flour, you can. And if you want to go for 100% whole wheat, that's also okay. For equipment, you need a large bowl, you need a measuring cup, some measuring spoons, and you're also going to need some bread pans, but that's later on. We'll talk about that later. So the first thing you do is you need 4 cups of warm water. I'm going to go to the tap. I just use tap water. Now, I've put the water in the bowl. The temperature of the water is between 110 and 115 degrees. So it's warmer than body temperature. You wouldn't put it in a baby bottle. But it's not so hot that it's going to seriously burn you or hurt you. The yeast wants the warm water so it can grow. But if it's too hot, the yeast will die. Now, so I'm going to put in 3 tablespoons of yeast. And I'm going to put in a tablespoon of sugar. You do need the sugar so that it will grow. But if you don't want to use white sugar, you could use brown sugar or honey or molasses. Now, the yeast is going to need about 5 minutes to grow. So I'm just going to walk away from the camera and let that happen. So Grace, when the yeast has sat for 5 to 10 minutes, it will grow and become foamy. If it hasn't done this, that means there's a problem with the yeast. Maybe the water was too hot. In any case, you can try again. One thing that can cause problems is having the water too hot. So if the first time you do this it doesn't grow, that would be a potential problem. If the water's too cool, it'll grow, but it'll grow slowly. That's how foamy it should be. And if you've done everything correctly, then you're good to go. So now at this point, you're going to be adding a half a cup or 4 ounces vegetable oil. You can use melted butter if you have it, and it adds some flavor, but I just use vegetable oil because it's easier. And then you're going to add either a cup of sugar or a cup of molasses. Now I use sugar because I prefer the lighter color, but the bread that you remember me making when I was in high school used molasses, so if you're trying to recreate that, you'll want to use some molasses. In addition, you need 2 tablespoons of salt. Okay. Now, when I talked about equipment, I forgot to tell you, it's helpful to have a whisk, and you will definitely need a spoon. So I'm going to start adding flour. I start with the whole wheat flour because it's easier to incorporate it at this stage than later on. As you can see, I'm not being super careful about how I measure. For this bread recipe, you'll be using between 9 and 12 cups of flour. If you use a whisk at this stage, it will incorporate the flour more smoothly and allow you to get it in without lumps. But if you don't have a whisk, a spoon will also do. So I've used about 4 cups of whole wheat flour. Add 1 more, and then I'm going to start using white flour. The reason I like it half and half is twofold. One, my family doesn't really care for 100% whole wheat. And 2, the gluten, the protein that exists in the flour, there's more of it in white flour, and so the bread rises better and it has a better texture if you add a little bit of white flour. Whole wheat flour, 100% whole wheat bread is good. It's very moist and delicious. But if you're going to use it, it's not going to probably rise as high, and the bread will be more dense. Which is fine if that's what you want. Now, when the bread starts to have a texture like this, so it's fairly dry, a little bit moist, but dry enough that if I turn it out on the board, on a floured surface, I can work it with my hands without it being too gushy and sticking to my fingers. So at this point, I'm going to put a cup of flour down on the surface. And I'm going to begin working this into the bread. A little bit of the dough will stick. You can scrape that off. And then you're going to be using your hands to do a process called kneading. Kneading is the process of folding the bread over on top of itself in order to give it strength, to develop the gluten, and to work in the last bit of flour that you need to give it its structure. So you see I'm kind of patting it into a circle, lifting it over on itself, and with the heel of my hand, I'm pushing it. Then I do a quarter turn, lift, and push. Quarter turn, lift, and push. I'm going to continue doing that. It's not necessary to push super hard. If you do push super hard, it won't benefit the bread, but you may hurt your wrists. So no need for that. Just gently keep working it, quarter turn at a time. You can see that as the flour starts to work in, that the bread develops its structure and becomes drier and more pliable. If you accidentally turn the bread out when it's a little bit stickier than it should be, that's not really a problem. It's just going to make it sticky on your hands, but that's no big deal. One of the hazards of making bread at this point is to add too much flour. If you add too much flour, the bread will be dry and heavy. So, I'm not sure if you noticed, I put a cup of flour down on the surface, and I put another half a cup of flour over top of it. I believe that that is going to be enough. You want to continue kneading the bread to develop the structure for probably 4 or 5 minutes. Now, at this point, it's what I would consider just a little bit too sticky. So I'm going to put a little bit more flour down. Knead it some more. Now, while I'm doing this, some bread recipes call for warm milk. Warm milk is certainly good. It makes the bread taste nice, but it can be tricky to get the milk warm enough. If you want the nutritional benefits and the flavor, another alternative would be to add a cup of milk powder to the bread. If you want to boost the nutrition of the bread, you can add a cup of wheat germ, or potentially some ground flax seed, or maybe other types of seeds like sesame or sunflower. Now, okay, this is what I consider to be a good texture. Notice when I knead it that it's starting to peel apart from itself a little bit. It's still sticky, but it's not quite as sticky as it was. In addition, it's holding its shape rather than kind of mushing down. And if I were to flip it over, it reminds me of my children's bums when they were tiny. It is dry, but you can sense just a little bit of warmth and moisture there. If I put a finger in, it bounces back, not completely, but about halfway. Alright? Now, at this point, we need to leave the bread for about 45 minutes so it can double in size. We can do this by cleaning out the bread bowl and oiling it and putting the bread in. Or alternatively, we can just brush aside this flour, leave it here on the counter. Either way, cover it with a clean, dry towel and allow it to grow. You want the room to be a comfortable room temperature, not cold, no drafts, but it doesn't have to be excessively warm. Somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour is how long this stage is going to take. So I'm going to turn the camera off and we'll come back in a few minutes.